All right, guys, today's Field Tips episode is going to be a special one. We're going to take a deep look into what is instinctive archery, what is aiming. We're going to look at the similarities, the differences, and hopefully this is going to help you to decide what method is best for you. So what is instinctive archery? What does it mean to aim a bow with no sights? Is there a such thing as instinctive aiming, or are these two things mutually exclusive? These are all questions that we're going to look at today, so stick around. So to get this video started right, so that we're all on the same page with exactly what we're talking about, we need to define these things. We need to define what is instinctive archery and what does it mean to aim a barebow with no sights. So we're going to start with instinctive. So I'm not interested in the semantics, the dictionary definition of what instinct means, but because I know there's going to be people with comments, I'm going to try to head some of that stuff off and just go ahead and get that out of the way. So instinct is an innate behavior, meaning something that we're born with. Instinctive archery, on the other hand, is something that we learn through repetition. Now, there is a lot of confusion or a lot of different perceptions of what instinctive archery is. Some people think that shooting a barebow with no sights is all instinctive, and in my perspective, that's incorrect. And so I am not trying to lay out a definition that everyone is going to agree on. What I want to do here is to define what I'm talking about when I say instinctive archery. So what I'm talking about when I say instinctive is that the archer's sole focus is on the spot that they want to hit, and they are unconscious of everything else, including their arrow's tip, their bow hand, etc. All right, so now let's define what it means to aim a barebow with no sights. For the definition of aiming, I'm going to say that the archer's focus is on the spot that they want to hit, but they are conscious of their arrow's tip in relation to that target, and they use that arrow tip as a sighting aid. Now, there are any number of ways that you can aim a traditional bow. There is gap shooting, there is string walking, shooting with a crawl, point of aim shooting. There is Howard Hill's split vision method of shooting. All of these things are different ways to aim, but they all kind of fall under that same definition. So one very important detail that I want to clarify when I'm talking about aiming is that we are never looking at the arrow. Our focus is on the spot that we want to hit. The arrow or the bow hand or the bow or whatever you're using to aim is in our peripheral vision. Now you may disagree with this definition, but for the purposes of this video, that's what we're going to use for the definition of instinctive and aiming. All right, so now that we've defined what is instinctive shooting and what is aiming and what the difference is, now let's look at the similarities. What is the same between instinctive shooting and aiming? And I would say everything. So if you look at some of Jeff Cavanaugh's videos on YouTube and a lot of the other guys that teach instinctive shooting, they talk a lot about repeatability. They talk about the importance of a solid anchor, back tension, and everything else that I promote and talk about in my videos. Having a repeatable shot and the foundations of archery is the same, no matter what kind of aiming or instinctive method that you use. So there seems to be this division amongst traditional archers based on how they shoot, instinctive or aiming. And although it is absolutely ridiculous to chastise someone based on how they shoot, when I think about it, I can kind of understand where they're coming from. Because learning to shoot a traditional bow represents a tremendous time investment. And so when somebody seems to criticize how you shoot or say that their method is better than yours, we can get a little bit defensive about it, and I know I've been guilty of this myself. And so these two camps, these two philosophies seem to suggest that these two things are mutually exclusive, that that you either shoot instinctively or you aim. And for the next couple of minutes, I'm going to try to lay out a pretty convincing argument that that is not the case at all. And so is there a such thing as instinctive aiming? Absolutely there is. Because when it comes to shooting a bow instinctively, there is one very, very important part of that that is transferable no matter what kind of aiming or instinctive method you're using, and that is the sight picture. You can think of the sight picture as just how things look when you shoot your bow. So when you come back to full draw and you're looking at your target, you can see things in your peripheral vision. You can see your bow, you can see your arrow. You may not be consciously focusing on these things, but you can see them. When we shoot a bow without the aid of sights, the sight picture is what we use to line that shot up. And one great way to understand the importance of a sight picture is to try to shoot at a laser pointer or a glow stick or something like that in a completely dark room. And believe it or not, creating a completely dark room where you can't see your hand in front of your face is not an easy thing to accomplish. But there's a very, very good example of this on Masters of the Barebow Volume 3, where Daryl Quidort tried this, and he found out that without that sight picture, he could not see his bow, he couldn't see his bow hand, his arrow, anything. Daryl's an instinctive shooter. Without that sight picture, his groups absolutely fell apart.
You know, back in Masters of the Barebow Volume 1, I stated that I shoot instinctively and I don't consciously line up anything in my shot, and I don't see the arrow in my peripheral vision. I said I could shoot in the dark, and Rod started making fun of me. So, to test that theory, I went into the basement at night, turned off the lights, covered the windows. I literally could not see my hand in front of my face, and I tried to shoot at a laser pointer. Well, at about 15 yards, my 4-inch group went to about 14 inches. For the first time in my life, I found myself consciously looking for something to line up. I'd never felt that before. So, I gotta eat crow on that shooting in the dark business. I can't shoot in the dark. I need enough light for my subconscious mind to line up that shot. Rod's right. I can't shoot in the dark.
Low light, yes.
Yeah, low light, yes. Darkness, no.
So if the sight picture is so important for accurate and consistent instinctive shooting, it would seem to support this concept, this idea of instinctive aiming. Even though Daryl is an instinctive shooter, he's still using that sight picture, those elements in his peripheral vision, to aim, albeit subconsciously. All right, and now it's time for a curveball. Are there instinctive elements in aiming? And again, I would have to say absolutely. So if you've watched any of my previous shooting videos, you'll know that I talk a lot about gap aiming method. And the reason that I talk about that is because for new archers, it's something that is very easily understood. It's a very easily explainable method of aiming. But really, when I shoot, I'm using the split vision method of shooting. And I'm going to explain this method of shooting in detail in a later video. But basically, what I'm talking about is I'm using my arrow's tip to line up my left and right. Now the elevation, that part is instinctive. When I'm shooting at 20 yards, I'm not consciously thinking that my gap needs to be 18 inches. I'm not consciously thinking of my gap as I move from 20 yards to 5 yards to 35 yards. All of those things I've learned through repetition, and I use that sight picture to figure out exactly where I need to hold my bow, just like you would in instinctive shooting. They're starting to sound pretty doggone similar, aren't they? So one of the big things that people often cite as a huge advantage of instinctive shooting over aiming is that instinctive shooting is a much more quick and fluid way of shooting, whereas aiming is slow and cumbersome. For anyone that still holds that perception, I would highly encourage you to look at some of the footage of Howard Hill shooting. Now, Howard Hill was one of the greatest archers that probably ever lived. And Howard aimed using a method that he called his split vision aiming, and he was very conscious of his arrow's tip in relation to the target. Let's check out some footage and see if you think it's either slow or cumbersome.
Right in the neck. Indians may have been Howard's teachers, but right now it looks like they could take some lessons from him. That's certainly one way to get rid of those old light bulbs. Zowie, dead center. Oh, goody goody, says his girlfriend.
Well, that was some pretty doggone good shooting, and it looked both quick and fluid to me. So now that we're talking about Howard Hill, I'd like to talk a little bit about why he chose his method of aiming versus a purely instinctive form of shooting where he's not conscious of the bow or the arrow or anything else. And so what he says in his book, Hunting the Hard Way, is that if he makes a shot and he misses high or low, all he has to do, he knows where his tip was in relation to that target. All he has to do is move his tip by the amount that he missed the target. And so if he shot 8 inches low, the next shot, he moves his tip up 8 inches and he hits the target where he wants to hit. Now, with instinctive shooting, you don't have that reference to be able to make those adjustments. That was his big argument for using the method of shooting that he shot with. And I personally completely agree with that philosophy, and that is one of the primary reasons that I choose to aim my bows. The other reason is that I make a lot of different bows, I make a lot of different arrows, and they don't all shoot the same. And so with an aiming method where I'm conscious of my arrow's tip in relation to the target, I can shoot my 62-pound hunting bow with 650 grain arrows, and it has a trajectory. Then I can go pick up a 45-pound bow with 500 grain arrows that would have a completely different trajectory, and within just a few shots, I can be hitting my mark because I am conscious of that arrow's tip, and I can make those adjustments pretty easily. Now, if I were to be shooting that bow purely instinctively, I could still do that, but it would take me much longer to do it. Instinctive archery, if done properly, meaning to build your shot upon those fundamental building blocks of archery, can be a very accurate method of shooting. But I think where a lot of people get in trouble when it comes to instinctive is they throw all of that out the window and they resort to a kind of just grip it and rip it style of shooting, which really isn't a style at all. And something that I had never thought about that I came to realize when I was gathering my thoughts for this video is that this is probably the primary reason that I personally shot so inconsistently when I was shooting with instinctive method, is because I thought, well, I'm shooting instinctively, it's like throwing a baseball, all I've got to do is concentrate on the target, draw my bow back, let her rip, and it's supposed to go where I'm looking. And like I said, I wasn't incorporating the fundamental building blocks, proper form, good back tension, all of these things, and my shooting reflected that. So to sum things up, the fundamentals of archery are the same. It doesn't matter if you're shooting a longbow, a recurve, or even a compound. It doesn't matter if you're aiming or if you're shooting instinctively. Having a shot, a repeatable shot, built upon those foundations is what it takes to become a great archer. When I started putting this video together, I got in contact with Denny Sturgis Jr. over at Traditional Vision Quest, and he was very kind to allow me to use these clips in this video. And so I want to put a plug in for the Masters of the Barebow series. When I was first starting to shoot, this series helped me tremendously. And Volume 3 in particular, I found to be very, very helpful. You can pick up these things straight from Denny at Traditional Vision Quest, and of course, you can always pick them up from Three Rivers as well. All right, guys, I hope you found this video helpful. If you're not subscribed to the channel, go ahead and do that because we have got some awesome bow hunting videos coming up later this fall. And then also go over to my Patreon site at patreon.com/ClayHayes and check that out. There's a ton of exclusive content over there as well. So with that, leave me a comment and let me know what you thought. We'll see you next time.